My sister asked me to refill the mimosa jug. It was her bridal brunch held on a Sunday morning so bright, it felt staged. A private patio cafe in Austin, white folding chairs lined like a wedding catalog, handmade flower arch, bobbing gently in the breeze. Lavender lemonade sparkled in glass pitchers. There was a harpist, a balloon artist, a hired photographer snapping candids near the croissant station. But no event planner. That was me, unofficially, unpaid. I had shown up 30 minutes early to lay out the table settings, fluff the seat cushions, and stack the gift bags. I was still in flats and hadn't touched a single pastry when she raised her glass and waved me over. Ronnie, we're out of mimosas again. I turned toward the beverage cart without a word. And that's when I heard it. She's basically staff with a bloodline. She said it lightly, lazily, but loud enough for her table to hear. Laughter followed, fizzy and polite, like a well-timed background track. Taylor, her maid of honor, gave a dramatic gasp. Someone else giggled into their champagne. I kept walking. But inside, the words crawled up my spine and lit the edges of my face. The condensation on the mimosa pitcher clung to my fingers like sweat on restraint. And in that moment, I knew in my family, silence hadn't made me noble. It had made me invisible. If you've ever been reduced to a background character in your own family's story, take a breath and subscribe. Your voice matters here. Behind me, a toast rose for pretty girls and pretty futures. My sister Daphne had always been both. Blonde, camera-ready, and born knowing how to pull attention like gravity. I was the quieter one, the reader, the helper, the one who didn't cry when left out, which made it easier to keep leaving me out. We're only 11 months apart. Irish twins, our mother used to say, but Daphne was the son. And I was taught to be grateful just to orbit her, so I studied. I hustled. While she curated charm, I collected clerkships. I earned early admission to UT Law, worked through 2 federal appointments, and now sit on the Fifth Circuit bench. Daphne tells people I do something in law. She never gets it quite right. If someone in your family downplays your entire career to keep the spotlight on themselves, leave a comment. You're not alone. That morning, she introduced me to her future in-laws as my older sister Veronica, then added with a playful smile, she's kind of the quiet one in the family. Her fiancé Grayson reached to shake my hand. Veronica, wait. Judge Miles. The table froze. Yes, I said calmly. Fifth Circuit. Grayson blinked. His father straightened in his seat. Taylor's hand paused mid-toast. Daphne's champagne flute hovered at her lips, her smile stiff, her eyes flicking to mine just once. No one laughed now. I poured the last of the orange juice into a cut glass pitcher. My hands were steady, though my skin buzzed like a struck bell. For once, I wasn't the one caught off guard. Grayson looked at me again, but this time with something else in his expression. Not just recognition, recalculation. He didn't just see me differently, he saw her differently. And that was the moment I knew the brunch had barely begun. But for my sister, something had already started to unravel. What she didn't know was that this wouldn't be her performance. It would be her reckoning. I arrived early to Ivy's bridal brunch, even though I knew better by now. The Honeycomb was the kind of place where the air smelled like peonies and polished wood. Ivy had picked it out personally, a garden bistro in Richmond, with peach linen napkins, floating candles in water bowls, and a harpist playing Vivaldi near a wall of climbing roses. She said it fit her vibe, soft, elegant, not too try-hard. The kind of place where she could pretend she had curated her entire life from Pinterest boards. She didn't mention the cost, not to me anyway. But I noticed the way she asked if I could help out by baking something sweet, so I did. I spent hours the night before making lavender vanilla bean cupcakes with buttercream roses hand-piped with a petal tip I bought just for the occasion. I arranged them in a white pastry box lined with parchment and tied it off with a lilac ribbon. I even printed a little tent card baked with love by Laurel. When I arrived, I slipped the box into the kitchen and asked the staff if I could plate them. They pointed me toward the back buffet. Ivy walked in 5 minutes later, already glowing in a champagne-wrapped dress and kitten heels. Her entourage followed behind, trailing perfume and iced lattes. She glanced at the cupcakes. "Oh, perfect," she said breezily, not stopping. "Put them next to the drinks, with the real food. Real food." I didn't flinch. I just nodded and carried the tray over to the drink station. I found a spot between the fruit board and the pitcher of cucumber water. I placed the tent card down gently. Then I took the seat furthest from the center, the one by the column, the one no one else wanted. Guests trickled in, bridesmaids in pastel sundresses, our mother in pearls. Someone passed out flower crowns. Someone else tried to organize a toast. I stayed seated, smiling, present, unobtrusive. Ivy glowed. She always did when she had an audience. Her laughter lifted above the music like it was mic'd. She twirled her glass, offered hugs, posed for selfies, kissed cheeks she barely knew. Camilla, her best friend, tapped her champagne glass with a spoon. "We all know Ivy's the golden one," she said with a laugh. "But it takes a really special person to let other people shine too." More laughter. Ivy raised her glass. "Cheers to the dull ones." There was more laughter, and I smiled. Because that's what I was expected to do. But something tight settled beneath my ribs. Not anger, not even hurt. Just that old familiar ache of being allowed in the room, but never on the guest list. Then the moment arrived. Michael, her fiancé, walked in fresh from court. Navy suit, briefcase in hand, smile easy. Camilla grinned. Future husband alert. "Hey Michael, bet you didn't know Ivy used to steal Laurel's clothes and try to pretend she was her. Whole identity crisis phase," Ivy shrieked. Camilla, one of the bridesmaids, tilted her head. "Wait, who's Laurel?" Ivy took a sip of champagne and said it so lightly you'd think I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. "Oh, she's my sister. She does court stuff, like I refilled toner in a back office, like I filed traffic tickets." Michael blinked. "You mean the judge?" The room paused. Camilla froze. My mother looked like someone had tapped her spine. Michael turned toward me. "Laurel Jennings, right? You're presiding judge for Virginia's 13th Civil Division." I didn't make the connection. I nodded once. "That's me." Ivy's hand twitched. Michael looked at her. "You never told me she was that, Judge Jennings." Ivy opened her mouth, then closed it. "Well, she finally said she's not like famous or anything." Michael didn't laugh. He looked back at me, and in that stillness something realigned. He saw me, not as Ivy's sister, not as a footnote, as a force. And I didn't have to say a word. No one asked about the cupcakes. But 2 hours later, when the party wound down, I noticed my plate was empty, and so was Michael's. This time I didn't fade. I was the lens that made everything else go blurry. The morning of Ivy's bridal brunch felt heavier than it should have. I had volunteered to arrive early, help set the room, and greet the guests, while she got her makeup done with her bridesmaids. Truthfully, I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, this would be the one event where I wasn't invisible. The venue was a lovely conservatory in downtown Denver with high arched windows, rows of cream-draped chairs, and gold-trimmed tableware. I had called ahead to check the seating, confirm the menu, and even paid for the mimosa bar upgrade when I learned the budget had run short. I never told Ivy. I just wanted her day to be perfect. But perfection was a one-way mirror in our family. She never saw me, only through me. When guests started arriving, old friends, family members, even her college mentor, I greeted each one with warmth. I had memorized names, dietary needs, seating requests. It was second nature by now. Hospitality was my work, and in many ways my emotional armor. Then Ivy arrived. She swept in wearing a pale blue satin dress and white heels trailing perfume and laughter. Her entourage trailed behind her iPhones, snapping photos as if royalty had just arrived. "Oh my God, you did all this," Ivy gasped, scanning the room. I smiled. "Yes, the conservatory handled the flowers, but I added the citrus candles from your Pinterest board." She blinked, then looked at her best friend Ashley. "Can you believe how good it looks? Like magazine level. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just more of the same." I let it slide. Then came the seating moment. Each place setting had personalized name cards. I had double-checked everything. Ivy's chair was at the head, naturally flanked by her future in-laws on one side and our parents on the other. I was at the end of the table, seated beside the groom's teenage cousin. The event began pleasantly enough, cheers, toasts, and French pastries. I poured drinks and made polite conversation. But about halfway through the brunch, as the chatter picked up and someone made a toast to Ivy's long journey from wild girl to graceful bride, something shifted. Ivy stood glass in hand. "Can I say something really quick?" she asked. Her cheeks flushed from champagne and attention. The room quieted. "I just want to thank everyone who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Especially Mom and Dad and the incredible folks at Whitman and Church who gave me a shot." There was a pause. "And of course, my girls," she said, gesturing to her bridesmaids, "who've been with me through everything." A few people clapped. She looked straight past me. I know I can be a bit dramatic. She laughed, but I've worked hard to get here. I've worked my way up. I didn't have help. I made my own life. My stomach turned. No help. I had paid her rent in college for 2 years. I had driven 6 hours through a snowstorm when she got her first job in Chicago just to help her unpack. I had edited every one of her grad school essays, but she didn't remember or didn't want to. And lastly, she said, raising her glass again, I want to thank everyone who ever doubted me, especially the people who called me spoiled or said I couldn't make it. I guess this wedding is my way of proving you wrong. Some guests laughed. Then she looked at me, directly. And to my sister, she said with a sweet, venom-laced smile, thanks for keeping the family grounded. You've always been so stable, that word, stable. It slid across the air like a slap in a silk glove. The room chuckled. I felt my face grow warm. She continued seriously, though, Vanessa's the rock of our family. You know, always there, steady job, no drama. I guess some people just aren't made for the spotlight. My mother laughed. My father chuckled politely. Her fiancé grinned. I took a sip of my orange juice. My hands were trembling slightly. I wasn't made for the spotlight, no drama stable. I had survived more loss, more late nights, and more quiet breakdowns than Ivy would ever know. I had cleaned up after her messes for years, covered for her, protected her. And here I was, a punchline. I let the comment slide in silence. Later in the restroom, I stood before the mirror, dabbing at the corners of my eyes. Another guest walked in, Mr. Rayner, a retired judge and longtime friend of our father. He glanced at me, then smiled. You handled that with grace, he said quietly. I shrugged. She means well. Maybe, he said, his tone measured, but you deserve better. His words sank in slowly, like rain through dry earth. That evening, I packed up the remaining favors, carried the floral arrangements out to Ivy's car, and handed over the event file to her coordinator. I walked back inside to get my coat, only to hear her say, loud enough for anyone nearby, honestly, if Vanessa would just loosen up, she might get a date one day. Ashley laughed. And I didn't. That was the moment something shifted inside me, not rage, not even sadness, just clarity. I had been walking through this wedding like a ghost, present but unseen, loved but only as background. Something had to change, and I already knew when it would. The rehearsal dinner was in 2 days, and I would no longer be silent. The morning after the engagement dinner, I woke up with a dull ache in my chest. Not the kind that comes from crying, it was the quiet, hollow kind. The kind that settles in when you've been humiliated, in front of people who once knew you by name but now treat you like scenery. We were staying in my sister's townhouse in Evanston. The air inside was cold, not in temperature but in tone. Her house had always been a gallery of curated perfection. Lemon eucalyptus candles, monogrammed guest towels, and throw pillows that looked like they had never supported a real human spine. But for all the surface elegance, it never felt like home. I was in the kitchen reheating coffee when Nicole walked in. She wore one of those silky wrap robes that always made her look like she was preparing for a magazine shoot even before breakfast. She didn't say good morning. She just reached for the almond milk and said, about last night, don't take it personally. That was the line that got me, not the snub, not the laughter, not even the moment when she said, not all of us could settle for a government job. But that line, don't take it personally, hit like glass under bare feet. I didn't answer right away. I just sipped the bitter coffee and stared at the side of her face. You know, I was just teasing, she added, smiling faintly as if I should be grateful that she still considered me family enough to joke with. You embarrassed me in front of 30 people, I said quietly. And you did it while looking me in the eye. She shrugged. I didn't think you'd be so sensitive. I mean, you're a judge. Aren't you used to people judging you? I set my mug down. I didn't come here to be part of your performance, Nicole. I came because I thought you wanted me here. She waved me off like I was being dramatic. You're being too serious. This whole thing with you always having to make things about right and wrong, it's exhausting. There it was again, that tight, sharp pull in my chest. Nicole had always hated that about me, not because I was moral, but because I couldn't be bought. I didn't laugh at cruelty. I didn't compliment people just to keep peace. And I didn't let her rewrite the truth even when it was inconvenient. But that morning, something shifted. I realized I had been waiting, still hoping for my sister to recognize me. Not for my job title, or my resume, or the black robe I wore in court. Just me. The girl she used to watch horror movies with under the blankets. The one who took the fall when Nicole broke Mom's antique vase. The big sister who brought her mac and cheese at 2 a.m. the night she flunked her college math final. But that version of us no longer lived here. So I smiled just slightly and said, "You're right." She blinked surprised. I am being serious, and I probably do make things too moral, but I think I'd rather be exhausting than cruel. With that, I went upstairs and began to pack. I didn't have a return flight booked. My court schedule didn't resume until Monday, and it was only Saturday morning. But I needed space, geographical and emotional. I needed a few hours where I wasn't just the quiet sister standing at the edge of other people's spotlight. Later that day, I checked into a hotel on the other side of Chicago. It was quiet facing Lake Michigan. The wind came through the window like a sigh, soft and gray. I ordered room service, something simple, and opened my laptop to review upcoming case files. But I couldn't focus. Instead, my mind kept replaying the scene at the engagement dinner, her words, her fiancé's reaction. The ripple in the room when he realized who I was. That moment, his face was the only honest thing all night. That man had been smiling politely until he heard Nicole say, "She's just a family court officer." But when he looked at me and I met his eyes, I saw his face go still. His posture changed. His expression shifted from politeness to recognition. And then he said it. "You're the judge." 3 words that didn't sound surprised. They sounded reverent. I hadn't noticed him before, at least not with more than a passing glance. But his words had echoed ever since. I didn't know what it meant. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But one thing was clear. He knew me beyond Nicole's version. Sunday morning, I sat alone on a bench outside the courthouse where I worked. The building was closed. The halls were quiet, but it was where I felt grounded again. And in that quiet, I began to write something I hadn't written in years, a letter. Not for Nicole, for myself. I wrote down everything she'd said to me. Every time I'd minimized my own victories, just to make her feel taller. Every time I let a comment slide for the sake of family unity. Every birthday I'd flown across the country to attend only to be seated at the kids' table or the end of the row. Every time I was expected to bring dessert instead of dignity. And then I wrote one more thing. She saw me as a shadow, but a shadow can only be cast by something with light. By the time I put the pen down, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not anger, not sorrow, just release. Nicole didn't need to apologize for me to feel whole. She didn't even need to understand, because someone at that dinner did. And sometimes a stranger's clarity is enough to remind you you're not invisible. The morning after the dinner, I woke up to silence. No phone calls, no messages. Just sunlight creeping across the hardwood floor of the small apartment I had rented on the other side of town. It was temporary, unfurnished, but it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed holding a letter I had written but hadn't yet sent. It wasn't for my sister. It was for her fiancé, the man who had frozen the moment he realized who I was. He hadn't just recognized me, he had stood, out of respect. That moment replayed in my mind like an old film strip, grainy, slow, powerful. I could still hear the scraping of the chair legs against the banquet hall floor, the stunned silence, the way my sister's face had drained of color. It wasn't just that he had stood, it was what he had said next. "Is that Judge Helena Brooks?" And then he bowed his head, not to impress anyone, not to be polite, but because he had appeared in my courtroom 3 years ago. He had been a young public defender, then nervous, earnest, brilliant. I remembered the case, a pro bono eviction trial. A mother of 3 fighting a landlord who wanted to flip the building for condos. He had made a compelling case with trembling hands, and I had ruled in his favor. That day, I'd seen him as someone trying to do right in a system that rarely allowed it. Now, 3 years later, he was engaged to my sister, a woman who still thought I worked for a legal aid clinic, still called my black robes robes of community service. My sister had no idea I was appointed to the state bench 2 years ago. She had stopped asking about my work a long time ago. She wasn't interested in how far I had come, only in how far I'd stayed in her mind at least. I thought about the speech she made before the dinner, the one where she called me the helpful sibling, the one who was good with paperwork, who liked to stay behind the scenes. I hadn't said anything that night, not when she handed me her coat as if I were staff, not when she passed me over in the toast, not even when she made a joke about how I'd probably be free to babysit their future kids, since she's always at home anyway. I had swallowed it, all of it. But when her fiancé saw me and said those 4 words, "You're the judge," everything changed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I realized silence only works until it doesn't. And for too long, I had let them write my story for me. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and I walked 4 blocks to the courthouse, not to see anyone, just to remind myself of where I belonged. The security guard greeted me with a nod. "Morning, Judge Brooks." I nodded back. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor. The courtroom was empty. My name was still etched on the bronze plate beside the door. Honorable Helena M. Brooks, State Judge. I stood in the middle of the room, the same way I had stood when I delivered the verdict. That changed that young man's life 3 years ago. And I realized something: I didn't owe anyone an explanation, but I owed myself the truth. My sister didn't know this part of me. She had never asked. She had never cared to look beyond what made her comfortable, the old version of me, the one she could patronize at family dinners and call when she needed free legal advice. But her fiancé had seen me, as I really was, not just at the banquet, but years before, when I had used my voice in that courtroom not to dominate but to protect. That night, I returned to my apartment and placed the sealed envelope on the table. I didn't send it. Instead, I drafted a new one, not to him, but to her. This time, it wasn't about titles or revelations. It was about boundaries. I wrote, "Dear Christine, I've spent many years playing the role you gave me, the lesser sister, the quiet one, the helper. But I'm done performing. I am not angry. I'm just done. You are getting married soon, and I wish you peace. I won't be attending. I hope one day you will look beyond the image you built of me. Until then, take care. Helena." I sealed that letter and dropped it in the mail. 3 days later, she called. "You're being dramatic," she said. "He didn't mean anything by it. He was just surprised." "So was I said. "He stood up for you. I don't understand why that upset you." "It didn't upset me," I said calmly. "It upset you." Silence. Then she snapped. "You made a scene." "No," I replied. "You made the scene. I just stepped out of it." That was the last time we spoke. But 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten note from her fiancé. It read, "Judge Brooks, I had no idea you were her sister. I also had no idea she could be so cruel. I admired you before. I admire you even more now. I'm sorry for what happened. I hope to speak with you again on your terms." David, I folded the note and placed it in the same drawer where I kept my appointment letter signed by the governor confirming my seat on the bench. Not everything needs a loud ending. Some truths are strong enough to stand in silence. 3 months passed. No wedding announcements, no family dinners, no calls from my sister. But then came the invitation. Not a phone call, not even a text, just a white envelope dropped into my mailbox on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Inside was a pastel blue card embossed with silver lettering. "You are cordially invited to the engagement celebration of Candace Ellis and Trevor Vincent Saturday at 4 p.m. Formal attire, kindly RSVP." There was no "Dear Vanessa," no note, no warmth, just an address, a date, and the audacity to assume I would show up. At first, I laughed. Then I stared at the envelope for a long time. I sat on my front porch holding it in my lap like it was a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere in my life anymore. Was this an olive branch or another performance? I thought back to the last time I saw Candace, her smug smile in that courthouse corridor. The way she had said, "She's just a social worker," as if my job, my dignity, and everything I had worked for was disposable. And now, 3 months later, I was being summoned. Not because she missed me, but because appearances demanded it. Because someone in her circle must have said, "You didn't invite your sister," and Candace always played perfect when eyes were watching. I RSVP'd yes, not to make peace, not for her, but because I needed to see it through. On Saturday, I chose a dress the color of garnet, deep red, grounded, and impossible to ignore. I wore my hair pinned back, clean makeup, and a necklace my foster mom had given me when I got into Columbia. The venue was an old Southern mansion turned event hall just outside Charleston, with towering white columns and a winding gravel drive. The kind of place where women wore pearls and men wore linen suits, even in 90-degree heat. As I stepped out of my car, I saw Candace's friends gathering on the front steps, holding glasses of sparkling wine. They looked my way, some smiled politely, others stared just a little too long. I was the outsider with the same last name. Inside the hall was arranged with long farmhouse tables draped in gold runners. Every detail was curated. Candace always had taste, I'll give her that. But the warmth, that was always missing. I found my place card near the back across from an empty seat. Candace, of course, was surrounded by bridesmaids at the head table. Trevor stood beside her, laughing with his best man, completely unaware that the most careful observer in the room was seated in the far corner. I didn't drink, I didn't mingle. I watched. And then halfway through dinner, someone tapped a glass with a spoon and a hush fell. Candace stood. She wore a champagne-colored silk dress, her hair swept into a low bun. She looked beautiful as always. But beneath it, I noticed the twitch in her fingers, the faint shift in her smile. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she said, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "It means the world to us, truly." There was polite applause. Then she added, "I want to especially thank my family, Mom and Dad, for teaching me about commitment. And of course, my sister Vanessa." She turned slightly as if noticing me for the first time. She's always been the quiet one, the grounded one, always working behind the scenes. And I know I've teased her over the years, but truly, she's my foundation. It was a lie, a pretty performative lie, and for the first time in years, I did not nod. I did not smile. I simply met her gaze across the table and held it. She faltered, just slightly. "And, thank you for coming." That was it. She moved on, but I noticed Trevor glance toward me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, as if he sensed something unspoken passing between the sisters he didn't really know. After the toast, I walked outside. The evening had cooled and the garden lights cast soft shadows across the stone path. I stood near the fountain sipping iced tea and taking in the sounds of distant music and awkward laughter from inside. I thought I would leave then, but the story wasn't done. Trevor came outside. He didn't see me at first. He stood under the portico checking his phone. Then as he turned to go back and his eyes landed on me, there was a pause. And then softly, almost nervously, he said, "You're Vanessa, right?" I nodded. "I didn't realize you were Judge Ellis." His voice cracked a little on the title, genuine recognition dawning. "I had no idea," he said. "Candace said you worked in community outreach." "I do," I said calmly, "among other things." There was silence. "I read one of your opinions in a guardianship case last year," he continued. "Didn't make the connection until just now. That was sharp, precise." I smiled gently. "Thank you." And then I walked past him, not to make a scene, not to steal the spotlight, but to remind myself I didn't need her approval. That night, I didn't speak to Candace again. I left before dessert without saying goodbye, but I knew she saw me walk out. Alone, steady, unmoved. She wanted a moment of grace for the cameras. What she got was a mirror held up to her own pretense, and for the first time she realized I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. What struck me most was not the silence between the sisters, but how silence can hold more power than applause. Vanessa didn't need revenge that shouted, she needed presence that could not be erased. She walked in with truth and walked out with clarity, and sometimes that is all it takes to shift the balance. Have you ever been invited to something not because you were wanted, but because they feared what your absence might say? Tell me your story, because somewhere someone else has felt that quiet sting too.